Hey, everybody, welcome to the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Special shout out to the Minnesota Nurses Association. I met you all down at the Selma commemoration, 60th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. Really, the set of tragic events and triumphant events that led to the Voting Rights Act. We've got martyrs, everybody. Jimmy Lee Jackson, a World War II veteran, African American, who was seeking to vote. That was part of the promise that was made to African Americans when they went into the Second World War, and it remained unfulfilled when they got home. And then Reverend James Reeb, American Universalist minister out of Boston, married with children, was so moved and so disturbed by what he had heard about Bloody Sunday, where John Lewis and Hosea Williams and members of SNCC and SCLC almost lost their lives. They were beaten severely on that Edmund Pettus Bridge. Well, when he came down, they went to dinner and he was beaten by a white mob to death. And then Viola Liuzzo, a married mother of 5 children. Her husband was a union leader in Detroit, an Italian American woman who just had a heart for justice, And indeed, at that time, Italian Americans had just been classified as white, maybe not even a generation, really. That happened after the Second World War. There was a reclassification that happened for them. That having been said, she wanted to strike a blow for justice, and she left her husband and children and went down to Selma. And she said, just let me be of service. And she was of service. At the end of the march, among other duties, she was driving people to and fro from the airport. Now, that was dangerous business at that time. My father was a student at the University of Chicago, and almost every classmate he had was white, and they went together, and they had to figure out how to choreograph how they were going to ride down from Chicago to Alabama, because it was dangerous. If you saw a mixed group of people who looked like equals, somebody was going to get killed, or all of them would. Well, she was murdered after the march. Everyone said, we've gotten to the march. No, that didn't happen to Mrs. Liuzzo. She was murdered as she drove. As she was driving, ferrying people to the airport. And so we think of these people today, because indeed it was those deaths. And Mrs. Amelia Boynton, who called Dr. King and said, you need to get down here because we've got a problem. She indeed ran for Congress in 1964. Finally, Terry Sewell became the first Black woman to become a congresswoman from Alabama, but she did try to run. She was an activist. And she kicked everything off, really. And we thank God for all of these people. And that's why you cannot take your right to vote, your right to be not on the menu, but at the table. Don't take it for granted. A lot of people were killed. They didn't just die. They were murdered for this right. It's a precious right. And we've got a lot going on. We need to really understand this process. So we've really, in America, only been free 60 years. Think about it. My brother, Congressman Jonathan Jackson Jr., said, really, I'm the first generation to be born with my full rights. I was born in the L. Richardson Hospital for Colored Women in Greensboro, North Carolina. I'm just 2 years older than my brother. I don't know, shame to that. My father said, if you don't like birthdays, try missing one. But freedom is just that close to us, and not being free is just that close. Think about that. Which brings us to really how we treat each other in this society. Who matters and who does not? You've heard me talk about the tent partnership, for refugees. Indeed, our own Secretary of State signed a memo of understanding with the head of Kobani Yogurt, and they came up with a program to bring refugees into the United States and into other Western countries to work to get ahead, really to work for cheap. We've got the H-1B visas at the top. We've got the tent partnership at the bottom. And yet we had 38,000 Ukrainians brought to Chicago, and that's at the beginning of their crisis. Many, many more have been brought in, and we've not heard a word. Not one word. Not one word. And yet the Venezuelans and the Haitians are the problem. So These sanctuary cities, we're very fortunate to have a mayor who is doing really a tremendous job under the most difficult of circumstances. And I say that because uh, Governor Greg Abbott down in Texas, if he wanted to resolve this crisis, he would not need to bring people all over the country. He's depositing people all over the country so they can go to work. Let's be clear on that. And there are resources that these under resourced communities that these migrants have been put into that they have never gotten. That's not the migrants' fault. That's the fault of the country. And we got to talk about that. All of these pieces. Well, you have Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City, the mayor of San Francisco, and our mayor, who had, and many others who went before Congress because they had to make the case before a hostile audience in the main about why they were hosting these people. I mean, what are you supposed to do? Uh, treat them disrespectfully? Well, let's talk about what happened because everybody was worried about Mayor Brandon Johnson. And he really came through with flying colors. People were surprised that he was cool, calm, collected. Everyone continues to talk about how he was rehearsed and practiced. Well, of course, you are. Before you go speak before a congressional panel, you are going to be rehearsed. You are going to go through many different scenarios and answers. That is what you do. So he did his job. And he's not as green as he was when he went into office. But let's talk about what happened. And let's talk about how we make a way forward. Of course, we have our dear brother beloved, Violence Interrupters. Theo Hardeman, you've got a book out. What is it? Where is it? Where can we get it?
Was titled "Interrupting Gun Violence: The Public Health Approach." You can purchase my book on Amazon. That's where it's at now. Yes, indeed. I appreciate you. Yes, indeed. Then I'm on WVON every Sunday morning from 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. here in Chicago.
Central Standard Time.
Yes, indeed.
And guess what? If you go online, you just go to WVON.com and you can hear it. Some of the best talk radio there is. Yes. And of course, we're on Keep Up Alive right after that from 7 to 9 on the iHeart Radio Network. Dr. Right. LaShawn Latrice, community psychologist. And of course, she is making noise for change. So we got to talk with you, but we're so honored to have someone who's new to the panel. But now that you're here, Alder Carlos Ramirez Rosa, guess what? Now you're family. So here we have it. He's from the 35th Ward here in Chicago. And so we're going to start with you, Alder. Help us to understand what prompted this hearing and what did the mayor say?
Well, thank you so much, Santita, for having me on. I think Mayor Johnson did a wonderful job. Republicans wanted to embarrass Mayor Johnson and other big city Democratic mayors. But while Republicans thrive on misinformation, we know that exposing things to the sun and to the light sanitizes. And that's exactly what these Democratic mayors did. There's a lot of misinformation driven by Republicans and the right wing about what it means to be a sanctuary city. The truth is that Chicago has been a sanctuary city for hundreds of years. It started when the Chicago City Council said that we would not follow the Fugitive Slave Act, and that if people freeing slavery came to the city of Chicago, we would not turn them over to slave catchers. That continued into the 1980s when refugees were fleeing violence in Central America, and that violence was being funded by Ronald Reagan and the US government. And the city of Chicago said that we would be a sanctuary for people fleeing violence. So Chicago has long been a sanctuary. And what our policy says here in the city of Chicago, our ordinance, and I know that because I helped write it, is that local police will focus on local policing issues. We cannot stop the federal government from enforcing federal immigration laws, nor do we stop the federal government from enforcing federal immigration laws. Just a month ago, we saw hundreds of ICE agents descend upon the city of Chicago and knock on doors and detain people. We cannot interfere with that. But what we can do is ensure that our local resources are spent on local issues. Our sanctuary city policy does not say that we have to provide services to people that are in the country without proper documentation. It does not say that we have to house people. That is not what our policy says. What our policy says is that no one should be afraid to call 911, because if you are in an emergency and you call the local police, they're not going to come and then try and detain you and turn you over to deportation. And that makes all of us safer. There is decades of research out of many very prestigious universities that shows that sanctuary cities are safer because everyone, regardless of their immigration status, is willing to call 911 and report crimes in an emergency. So I think that, the mayor did very well and the other mayors did very well, because Republicans wanted to misinform the public. They wanted to bring these mayors in front of them and embarrass them. And it backfired because these mayors were actually able to set the record straight and were able to tell the truth. Sanctuary cities are safer than non-sanctuary cities because no one is afraid to call 911, and because local policing resources are focused on solving local crimes, not doing whatever Donald Trump tells them to do. And so I'm very proud of our mayor. I'm very proud of the other mayors on that panel. They really set the record straight and did not allow Republicans to embarrass them.
So let me ask you, what is next? I mean, because we had this hearing, it's performative, but is it reformative? I mean, what's next? I mean, because you still have people who are desperate, who are in under-resourced communities, so they're with people who are already desperate. What is the way forward, Alder?
Yeah, I think it's important that we continue to educate the public on what it means to be a sanctuary city. Chicago is not just a sanctuary city for undocumented immigrants or all immigrants. We are also a sanctuary city for women seeking reproductive health. So under Mayor Lori Lightfoot, we passed a number of ordinances that protect women seeking abortion care and access in the city of Chicago. So we know that states like Missouri are passing laws to criminalize the act of seeking an abortion. And they want us to arrest people who cross from the state of Missouri into Chicago seeking abortion care. They want us to use our local police resources to arrest those people and turn them over to Missouri. And so we passed an ordinance to say we are going to be a sanctuary for abortion, and that women coming from other states seeking that health care will not be turned away, and we will not abide by outside state laws. Now, that's within limitations. The supreme law of the land, the U.S. Constitution, is very clear. There are certain instances where federal law trumps state law, but there are a lot of instances where state law cannot be coerced or changed by federal law. And so obviously we have to abide by the U.S. Constitution, but within that framework of the U.S. Constitution, there's a lot that local governments can do to protect local rights. So I think it's important to continue to educate people. What does it mean to be a sanctuary? And we also have to expand the definition of sanctuary. So Chicago is a place where many trans people from across the globe come to Chicago seeking freedom. Unfortunately, we also lead the nation in the number of Black trans women being killed. And so I passed an ordinance with Mayor Johnson to work towards making Chicago a sanctuary for trans people, particularly Black trans women that face too much violence in our city. And we now have a working group that's in place. We're working with organizations to discuss how Chicago can expand that definition of sanctuary. So we have to understand that Donald Trump is coming after all of us. He's coming after Black History Month. He's coming after immigrants. He's coming after gay people. I myself am a gay man. He's coming after workers, gutting workers' rights. And so it's important for all of us to stand in solidarity and say the city of Chicago is going to be a sanctuary for everyone, regardless of your race, gender, creed. We are going to defend everyone from this right-wing administration that wants to cause harm to us all.
Alder Carlos Ramirez Rosa, here from the great city of Chicago, 35th Ward, young man doing some great things. Dr. LaShawn Latrice, what did you make of the mayor's appearance before this congressional committee? A lot of people were holding their breaths. I was not. I felt that he was going to, I felt he was, he's not the same person we elected. You can't be. You know this as a psychologist now. When your circumstances change, you're supposed to change too. There's some things that he understands and that he didn't understand before. The things I'm sure you're no longer a civilian, Alder Ramirez Rosa. You got to see that, and you have to serve people who didn't vote for you. And some people don't like you, and that kind of shapes you, you know. And it I think it helps you to grow if you handle it correctly. But what were your impressions of Mayor Brandon Johnson this week, and even the other mayors, and how they handled this issue?
I wasn't worried about how he was going to come out. I know that he seems to have the ability to adapt to the circumstances, and he's always very well poised. I don't think he's the same person, he doesn't carry the same views or perspective when he first came in as mayor. But I also think that he has become well aware of his role as an African American man in the role of the mayor of a city such as Chicago. But I also was not shocked at how poised and how well he answered questions, and how he was not he didn't appear to be shaky about what it was that he was trying to convey. And he did an excellent job, as well as the other mayors, because they are progressive and they believe in what they're actually doing, what they're a part of, and it comes out in the way that they communicate. So they did a very good job. The people that were on the edges of their seats probably were a little unsure, because they thought by him being on the hot seat, that was going to like push him to a place where he couldn't necessarily communicate effectively. But he did a wonderful job, and I'm very proud of him, and I'm proud of him as mayor of Chicago, how he stood strong and firm in that conversation.
So you think that he was the picture of strength?
Yes, I think that some of the circumstances that he's been placed under, even though they have not been very leveled, I think he somehow has always emerged as someone who still tries to remain optimistic but push forward. And I think he's developing thicker skin along the way in this process. And for that, I'm very, very happy for him, because oftentimes I wish I could have just stepped up and said, let me say this one for you.
No.
Let me respond for you. And the difference is that he is a man of integrity, a man who is God-fearing, and a man of humanity. And so a lot of his responses, he just crafts around those things, and he's just remained a constant force in that respect. And I really am proud of the way that he stood his ground.
Theo Hardeman, your impressions, your thought.
Well, I'm happy to see I'm going last, because it gives me a chance to put my thinking cap on. And I think I know Carlos Ramirez. I'm just messing with you, Carlos. I've met you several times. It's all about presentation. Now that I listen here, I had my issues with the congressional hearing in the beginning, but I'm more open-minded now, because like the alderman was talking about, educating people on the history of the sanctuary city, policies and process. Right now, a couple of things. I know
before you go any further, why do you think that was necessary?
Because
to educate
people
us on sanctuary cities.
Well, people just don't know. I mean, they're looking at the information we have in front of us today. They're not looking at the information that led Chicago into becoming a sanctuary city. Taking in fugitive African people that were forced into slavery. That's major. People need to know that, right? And
that we too have been.
Yeah.
Because we were northern refugees. I mean, we were run out of the South.
Yes.
Right?
That's what I'm talking about, right? Yeah. And so the reality, only issue I do have, and I have to be straightforward, I'm not going to talk like everything's just so good. When the mayor was asked about how much money was spent on the migrants, he said 1% of the budget of Texas, whatever the case may be. I wish he would have just gave a number like the mayor of New York. He actually provided an actual number. So, that's the only issue I might have seen myself. I know the mayor did not create this here scenario, but I gave everybody in the city, Carlos, a solution. I don't think people would agree with it, but the thing is, this is the solution I would recommend. Place a hold on sanctuary city, or suspend it temporarily, hear me clearly, temporarily, until we get everything together, because there was no way in the world Chicago could have kept taking in a lot of the migrants like Governor just busting them in, you know, like record numbers, right? I think to the tune of about 51,000, and that's not counting the Ukrainian refugees, like 38,000. We're talking about close to 100,000 people came to Chicago just in that short period of time. So what I'm saying, just put a hold on it until we get it together so we can evaluate it and see what kind of resources we really have to work this situation out. And the reason a lot of African-American people became upset, with all due respect, is because we have been, seems like we continue to get pushed to the back of the line when it comes to resources in the city. That's the issue a lot of us had. But we're not holding anything against the mayor. I want to make that crystal clear. The mayor inherited this particular crisis, and that's where we are today. So the hearing, you know, I agree with the Alderman and Dr. Latrice as well in regards, because also the reality of migrants in Chicago, I don't think we painted the picture properly. So it's a difference between somebody seeking asylum opposed to being a migrant, right? So that picture should have been painted a little stronger so people can understand the mindset of it. And I think then people would have been a little bit more receptive, all right? That's just my take on it. But, you know, the verdict is still out. We'll see what happens. I haven't heard a lot about the migrants in Chicago lately. It seems like everybody's kind of going, you know, undercover or something. I want to use that word, undercover, because there used to be a lot of migrants on Lakeshore Drive around 54th, Lakeshore Drive, and those little hotel areas there. I don't see them over there anymore. And I mean, it's really something. And then I understand and respect people that want to come to the United States to have a better life. I got that. I'm not against that. How could I be against that? So the reality of it is that's where I'm at. That's my the way I look at it, Santita.
Well, you know, so I'm trying to go around this and ask.
Yeah.
I mean, Lisa Fafundo asks this question: what does this have to do with strained resources by illegal immigrants? Alder, Carlos Ramirez Rosa, why don't you speak to that? And then I want to go around this, go around the panel, because you're right. We already have strained resources. There's no question about that, but they shouldn't be, because we have misplaced priorities. I have to say that, Alder Ramirez Rosa. I mean, Dr. King warned us 60 years ago that the Great Society would go out the window if we continue to pour money into wars and move away from programs of social uplift. Somehow we can find money for bombs, but not breakfast, right?
Thank you for that, Santita, because the reality is that Venezuelan migrants are fleeing a crisis that has been exacerbated by U.S. foreign diplomacy. So it was under the democratically elected president of Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, that the country opted to be a sovereign nation. Venezuela said, we will no longer be a puppet for the United States government. And Venezuela has a lot of oil. And that country said, we will be independent. We will follow our own path. And the U.S. government said, if you no longer want to be our puppet, then we are going to punish you. And so a lot of resources have been spent by the U.S. federal government, starting under George W. Bush, to destabilize the country, to place sanctions, to cause economic pain on the average Venezuelan. And what is the result? We see people fleeing Venezuela and coming to the United States. So we have to understand that it is the U.S. policies that are driving a lot of this migration, similar to what we saw in the 1980s when it was Central American refugees that were fleeing conflicts that were being funded by the U.S. government.
Wait a minute, stop right there. They were fleeing militias that we were paying to drive them out of their country.
Yes, and they were committing genocide against indigenous populations.
So because I want to establish that. I think people need to understand Venezuela not only has a lot of oil, they have among the world's best oil, most high quality oil. Somehow or another, we think that is our oil underneath these people's feet. It is not true. And so who wants to leave Venezuela? And I love Sweet Home Chicago, but I'm from here. And I have 3 or 4 seasons of clothes to prove it. Now, when you are in a tropical climate, Alder, come on. Everybody's trying to come up here. I mean, I'm just being honest. I want everyone to let's start thinking. But I feel like we're being gamed here. Because they didn't put them in Evanston. They didn't put them in Lincoln Park. They put them in a community that was already struggling. I mean, We can't get the resources there already. In Inglewood, people live 30 fewer years than people on the north side in the wealthiest communities. So I mean, and I'm not blaming them. I'm just putting it out there because people, that's what, you know, the misplaced priorities have got everybody at each other's throats. Alder.
And I agree with you, and I think that is, right before Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated, he was turning his focus and the movement's focus on income inequality and the war machine. He was talking about the role that the US government plays in funding global conflicts and the amount of money that we spend on sending bombs abroad, as opposed to investing that money in the most impoverished, most disenfranchised communities. And he paid the ultimate price for telling that truth.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important for us to understand that if we have issues with Venezuelan migrants coming to the city of Chicago or to the United States, then we should start by reforming our federal policies, which are being put into place by federal policymakers that are intended to destabilize the Venezuelan economy. But in terms of the sanctuary city, what I'll say again, our sanctuary city ordinance does not say that we have to house anyone. It does not say that we have to accept anyone into the city of Chicago. All our sanctuary city law says, which is the welcoming city ordinance, all it says is that local police will focus on local policing issues. And that if ICE has a judicial warrant, then per law, we have to follow that judicial warrant. But if ICE comes to us and says, we're going to deputize all of your police officers, and now they're going to spend the next 3 months focusing on deporting people as opposed to solving the violent crimes or the domestic violence incidents or the rapes happening in a community, our sanctuary city ordinance says, no, our local police are going to focus on local policing issues because that's what we pay them for. Federal ICE agents, you all do your job of enforcing federal immigration law. So that's all our sanctuary city law says. Now, in terms of, migrants arriving here and being bused here, we could have said anything. We could have said, we don't want this to happen. The governor of Texas would have kept sending people here. He would have done that regardless. And our option was, are we going to have people sleeping in tent cities in the street, which would be a public crisis of its own? Or are we going to do what is called of us in this moment and get people into housing? And there's actually a lot of Mexican immigrants who have been here for many, many years who are very upset. And they say, well, when we arrived here, no one gave us an apartment. No one gave us a shelter. And the reality is that it's multiple crises being compounded because 20, 30 years ago, housing was a lot cheaper than it is today. Mm-hmm. So we have the housing crisis. We have, crises at the federal level with its, military policies and its immigration policies. And it's arriving here in our back door. And we're trying to do what we possibly can. We're trying to do the best with the situation. And so I don't know if I could say this word, but it's a damned if we do, damned if we don't situation. Because Denver said we're only going to give people 2 weeks of shelter. And now their parks are full of, tent encampments that they don't know what to do. And so the mayor of the city of Chicago and city leaders said, we're going to give people a 6-month shelter policy stay and transition folks into housing. And ultimately, I think that's the better option because it got people onto the path to self-sufficiency. So I think that we were doing the best that we could given the situation that we were in.
Well, I mean, the fact is, Alder Ramirez Rosa, he is from Chicago, the 35th Ward. We have more vacant units of housing than we do have homeless people in the United States. We don't have a housing crisis. We have a priority crisis, Alder, because we don't want to feed anyone. We don't want to house anyone. We don't want to clothe anyone. Dr. LaShawn Latrice, we don't want to educate anyone. I mean, think about it. We could, if we want, you got a country of 330 to 340 million people. You don't even have 1 million hospital beds. Are you serious right now? Alder, come on. But I know and with that, you've got all of this, the pressures on your budget. Where is the money going to come from? Not only to take care of them, but now we've got another crisis. We've got these government workers who are losing their jobs. These Doge purges are threatening to bankrupt Kansas City because they have lost so many jobs there that it has destabilized the entire economy. So, Alder Carlos Ramirez Rosa, I mean, where does the money come from? Um, I mean, and just how can we make sure, how can we ensure that all Chicagoans have their basic needs met?
Well, I think that again, the city government was responding to the crisis that we were in, and we were in the midst of that crisis.
Because you just had a lot
And
of people that were just pulled in on you, and you were like, "Whoa, okay, I got to do
exactly.
something."
And so what do you do in that situation? And again, Denver did not have a shelter policy that extended beyond 2 weeks. Denver did not have a resettlement policy to get people into permanent housing. And we see the result of that, right? They're suffering from that today because they did not deal with the issue as it arose. Ultimately, I think it would have been best for the federal government to, one, end the sanctions against Venezuela so that we don't see such a massive influx of Venezuelan migrants leaving their country because of lack of economic opportunity that's being exacerbated by the sanctions. I think two, stop spending so much on foreign wars, foreign intervention, bombs, and the war machine, and instead spend that money in our communities. After World War II, there was the Marshall Plan in Europe, and Europe is benefiting to this day. But we saw Reconstruction stopped by white supremacy and white nationalists. And so the promise of Reconstruction was never seen through. We saw the war on poverty ended by the war on Vietnam. And so programs that were helping to lift people out of poverty were instead put to the back burner because we had to go bomb the people of Vietnam. And now what we're seeing is decades of Reaganomics, where so many of the programs that were in place to help lift people out of poverty were destroyed under Ronald Reagan. And we continue on that trajectory today, to the extent where now we're even seeing more destruction at the federal level. And we're now at risk of losing Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, which are programs that help some of the poorest, most vulnerable people in our society. So I think that we as a country have our priorities wrong. And ultimately, I'm not going to fault the mayor of the city of Chicago for trying to do the best in that situation. You know, under Mayor Lori Lightfoot, there were lots of people sleeping in police stations. That was not tenable. It was a bad situation for the people sleeping there. It was a bad situation for the police officers who were struggling with that in their workplace. We transitioned away from that and we got people into temporary shelters. And had we not put people into temporary shelters and onto a path to housing and self-sufficiency, we would have ended up with people sleeping in the parks. And look, we still have people sleeping in the parks, but it's nowhere near the level that we would have seen had we not stepped in the way that we did during that crisis. And again, there is no law in the books that require us to do that. That was done because it was a strategic, necessary thing to do in that moment. And ultimately, we really had no other choice.
Well, we had no other choice, but you know, you have. I mean, we are seeing the polls that show that the mayor has really, really, really challenging polling numbers. Do you think that this hearing might have helped him to turn a corner? I mean, and I'm going to first ask you that, Alder Carlos Ramirez Rosa, and then I want to hear from you, T.O., and Dr. LaShawn Latrice. I want to hear what you're hearing from people. Right, Alder, has this helped him to turn a corner?
I think that anytime people see their mayor standing up to Donald Trump and standing up for the people of the city of Chicago, that's something that people applaud and are excited about. And I've heard from so many people in my community and across the city that have said that they are proud that our mayor is standing up to Donald Trump in this moment. And that's something that I've heard from many different people across the past several days.
Well, first you, T.O.
Well, yeah, what I'm hearing on the ground level, a lot of people are like 50-50 with the mayor's presentation. And Alderman, out of all due respect, we have 2 or 3 different crises in Chicago. Unemployment for African-American young men between the age of 16 to 24 is 85%. Right now, we had 68,000 homeless people in Chicago before the migrants arrived here in Chicago. So those were some crises that should have been dealt with. The one good thing that came out of the migrant crisis is that the 68,000 homeless people became sort of like a priority once a lot of attention was placed on the fact that those people needed to be housed and they needed resources as well. So we have to be straight up about some of the long-term issues that have taken place. And once again, A lot of these issues took place before Mayor Brandon Johnson, got into the office. I want to make that clear also. But we have a lot of issues in Chicago way before the migrants, right? The gun violence epidemic and everything like that. So to find $500 to $600 million just like that to address that particular crisis, to me, I'm just talking about to me and a lot of people that I know. And I'm not against Mayor Brandon Johnson. I know I've been knowing him for like 25 years. So it's not like I'm against him, but I'm going to speak on the way that some of the people I speak to, how they share their thoughts with me, because I want to speak up for the voiceless people here in Chicago that long-term need resources. And I know a lot of times people don't want to talk about reparations. I just say this quickly. When it comes to reparations from an African-American standpoint, we're talking about $600-700 million for migrants, state and city, whatever county, but nothing has been placed in reparations, period. And some people think African-American people looking for a handout. We're not looking for a handout. African-American people were forced over here in chattel slavery. It's a whole different, it hits different. That's all I'm saying. So that's the point of contention that we have. That does not mean we're against anybody, okay? We stand for the rights of all people, but let's never forget that our people need resources just the same. It's a lot of single Black women out there that would love to be housed somewhere. It's a lot of young men out here on the streets right now that would love to be housed somewhere. In Oak Park, they're putting migrants up, paying 2 years rent for them and helping them get cars and house. Look here, it's a lot. See, it's different forms of reparations. Like in the city of Evanston, they're helping African-American people, first-time home buyers, like $25,000. So we should put some focus on reparations as well. That's my main standpoint, all right? I don't want to just like watch this over a certain way, but to answer your question, Santita, Mayor Johnson is at a 6% approval rating right now due to the handling of the migrant crisis. I don't think he would have been at 6%. It's all about how you present the issue. It should have been all about asylum seekers. Like Carlos, the alderman, said, it should have been given that history, what happened in Venezuela over there, and how the Ukrainians came in because of the war in the Ukraine. It's the context you put it in. And I think he would have did much better, and his approval ratings would not be down like they are right now. All right?
Unbelievable. I mean, because we're still not looking at Dr. Latrice. Psychologically, this has a tremendous impact. I've seen outside of stores women with their babies in the dead of winter, one in a stroller, one not in a stroller. I said, okay, this child in the stroller is not even in preschool. I mean, this is something that we understand, and I think as Black people, because we know what our struggle has been about in this country. I mean, so what is the answer, or one of them? I mean, what do you think should happen next, Dr. LaShawn Latrice?
I think we should go back to the drawing board. And I mean, we as a city, as a group of unified minds, we should go back to the drawing board, because one thing I can say about what Tio has said is the way things are framed seems to be a bit intentional to turn groups against each other. And what I saw from the very beginning was angry people who felt like you're overlooking the people that are in the city of Chicago who have all of these issues and needs that are not being met or addressed. And then it looks like people are being brought from other places. But then there was also an intentional omission of information about the Ukrainians who just slid in and was able to kind of just gravitate into society.
No, wait, hold up. You don't slide up in here. Not 38,000. You're brought here. No, let's be honest. They were brought here and it was all good. And so my thing is, wait a minute. Something is rotten in Denmark.
That's right.
Because some people, because asylum is a technical issue. You don't get asylum until you are in a country and you don't want to go back home for whatever reasons, right? That's what asylum is. So we're calling them asylum seekers, and that's not technically what they are.
Mm-hmm.
But they have been brought here. That's why I brought up the 10th Partnership for Refugees. This was signed, oh my goodness. This is dated December 12th, 2022. And 2022. I said, I keep sending this to you all because I want people to see it, because the man who founded the Kobani yogurt brand who hails from Turkey. This is from Alder. This is from the State Department. Um, uh, he wanted to make, I'm reading, make better food accessible to more people while improving local conditions. Mr. Hamdi is a devoted philanthropist, and he founded the Tent Partnership for Refugees in 2016. Under his leadership and supported by his team's dedication in the years since, the network now tops more than 300 companies and now is more than 400. They are committed to providing tens of thousands of refugees with work, training, and mentorship opportunities in order to improve their economic security and facilitate their integration into our country and other countries. Look, this is a corporate plan, and it was the memo of the understanding codifying this program was signed by then Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Now, let me pivot back to the Alder. I mean, I don't know. It can't get any plainer than that. This is not something that Mayor Johnson or the mayor of San Francisco or the mayor of New York have cooked up. This was thrust upon them.
Yeah, and I want to make it clear that I agree with everything that Tio has said. And to your point, Santita, and to the doctor's point, Ukrainian refugees received so much assistance from the federal government, whether it was their plane ticket to come to the city of Chicago, whether it was moving expenses, whether it was their apartment. And so the federal government had resources for Ukrainian refugees, but did not have those same resources for Venezuelan refugees.
I want you to slow down, and I want you to say that one more time. Because Tio, so I said they didn't just slide in here.
That's right.
They were brought here. They were settled here. 38,000 at the top. I don't even know how many more were brought in. I want you to tell us what kind of support they got. First of all, they were given plane tickets to get here, right?
Correct. So, the federal government has resources for refugee resettlement. And in this instance, the federal government decided to open up that tap of resources for refugee resettlement for Ukrainian refugees.
Okay.
And we have seen this throughout the history of immigration policy in the United States. There are certain immigrants that are preferred and receive preferential treatment from the federal government. And I think that it is no secret that it is rooted in the white supremacist history of this country, as well as the anti-Blackness that is rampant. Because so many of the Venezuelan migrants that came to the city of Chicago and that came to the United States are descended from people brought to Africa through the slave trade and to the Caribbean, because the Caribbean saw the most people brought from Africa in chains.
That's correct.
Okay, I just wanted to make it clear that there were some people who were brought here. They were settled, and they were settled not in Inglewood, not in Pilsen. No, they were not settled on the west side. I mean, they were not settled in Lincoln Park. They were taken to a nice community and they were absorbed. And I think that's been my issue. And I've been beating that drum, Tio Hardiman, for a long time.
Yeah.
Dr. Latrice, I've been saying, wait a minute, something else is going on here. We're missing this, because there's some people who are being brought here by the tens of thousands, and we're not talking about it. There is no complaint by a lot of people who are descended from Ukraine, by the way. I'm just, Alder, come on. I'm like, wait a minute. Because it's always the brown people who create the crisis, and white people are the people who come and build this country. And no. The country was built by enslaved people on stolen land of indigenous people, okay? After we built it, then we opened the doors so people could come here and build upon it, build a better life. But the country was built by us. We built the White House twice, because the British did burn it down in 1812. I'm just keeping it 100.
Yeah.
In the next hour, we're going to be talking with Dr. David Gibbs. I'm running a little late, but we will be over there in about 7 minutes. And I want to go around this because, I'm so thrilled that Alder, Carlos Ramirez Rosa, that you gave us the history of the sanctuary cities. Because I think, Tio Hardiman, when we hear, wait a minute, a lot of people got sanctuary here.
Exactly.
You
That was
know,
important. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, and why do you think that's important?
Because people, they don't know. I was about to tell the alderman, you might have to go on a speakers tour throughout the city in a lot of different areas and just bring the multitudes of the people out and educate them one way or the other. And I think people may just open up a little bit more and understand the issue. And then another thing on the political side, see, just because I disagree with somebody, it does not mean I'm against them. And I think a lot of politicians are very sensitive. If you make the wrong statement, you don't agree with one of their policies, all of a sudden you become an enemy for life. We got to stop thinking like that and just support one another, because a lot of times people like myself, we bring another perspective to the table. That doesn't mean we're against anybody. Let's just try to work together. So I just think it's very valuable information. It should be put out there just like that. I just want to go over the last 200-year history, whatever the case may be, so people can be educated and understand the importance of Chicago being a sanctuary city, and how they're like the Alderman said also, it's not about just housing people, just give them refuge, whatever the case may be. But I think it's like a lot of misplaced and displaced priorities to a degree, because we have to really balance our resources. And it appeared that a lot of the resources went in one direction, opposed to helping everybody out. That's where a lot of the confusion, a lot of the what you might say anger and resentment came in, because it appeared when you look at that big number, it's 500 million, 600 million people saying, what the hell is going on? So that's now we can kind of break that down a little bit and educate the people. So I salute, I'm not saying this because Alderman's here, but I salute that information that he put out there, which I think was valuable to me. Even here today, it's valuable to me.
Well, but to be fair, I mean, you're a stand-up man.
Yes,
and
indeed.
I've seen you change your mind when you've gotten more information, which, I mean, that's big. And so I appreciate that, because, because Alder, when you brought in that information, wait a minute, everybody here is a refugee. Everybody. We're not indigenous people. So somehow or another, and in Chicago, because the Mississippi River is right over here, we floated up on it just because, everybody ran out of the Deep South. At some point, I mean, that's what the people from Tulsa are here. They were run out of Tulsa. They were bombed out. They had to go someplace. That's where John Rogers and his family came from.
Mm.
Yeah. They created a hotel that was so fine, that it is the model for the Hilton chain, the Stratford Hotel in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was the most splendid of its kind, because coming out of slavery, the Black people were the most skilled, and we were the most sought after workers, because we built everything. Because we did everything. We knew everything. We invented everything, the stoplight, everything. That's what we did. Because we made the country, we built it and made it work. So, I think that when we get the history, things can turn around a bit. Alder Ramirez Rosa. I think once we, and that's why I want us to know, that's why I think looking at the mayor be in command, I think made us feel better as Chicagoans. I mean, no, that's a question for you, Dr. LaShawn Latrice. Because it's optics. You never want your leader to look unsteady.
Hmm.
And he looked like he had full command. What do you think? I mean, because every news article that I've been reading, and I saw it myself, every news article that I've read said, they were like, wait a minute, he's not the combative guy that we saw. He knows he never would have risen as high in the teachers union and have been married to his beautiful wife and managed those beautiful, well-behaved children he has if he were not someone who had command of himself.
Absolutely.
Come on. So, because optically, what do you think changed for people? Do you think anything did change?
I think some things did change. I think people are starting to realize now that the root of many of these issues and questions, even putting them before Congress to be questioned, is rooted in a lot of the systemic racism that exists that people don't want to talk about. I mean, when you're talking about people from Venezuela versus people from Haitian versus people from Ukrainian, look at how the perspectives are so different when you're viewing these group of people versus those group of people. Oh, it's okay to house Ukrainians. It's okay to pave the way for them. But when it comes to those from Venezuela, those from Haitian, there's always these negative connotations associated with it. And it just really bugs me that nobody really wants to talk about the underlying root of racism that exists behind that. And when you look at even the questions about sanctuary cities and how these mayors were put on the hot seat, what about a sanctuary state? Why are we talking about just a city? Like if they remove that umbrella, the state is just going to change instantly. Nobody's talking about that either.
Well, I think it's got to change, and I think, I think that when we are armed with the right information, as you said, Tio Hardiman, and of course you can hear more of this, some great talk every Sunday morning from 6 to 7 a.m. on WVON. Don't be restricted by your zip code. Anyone from all over the world can go to WVON.com and hear this show, and you can call in, and you will have a wonderful time. I want your closing thought, Tio Hardiman.
Well, just keep it simple. Tyrone Davis, the R&B blues singer, had a song, "Baby, Can I Change My Mind?" And that's I'll leave on that note there. So we all have a nice Sunday here today, all right?
That was too rich. And then he said, if I could turn back the time.
That's right. Change my mind.
Davis. Come on now.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Okay. Dr. LaShawn on the streets, now that he's taken us back to the Jet Soul Brothers top 20 chart.
That's right. You already know it. That's right.
You always trust Tio gonna do something like to take us back.
Right, Dr. Latrice know me. Yeah.
I would just say in conclusion, I just think that we should continue to push for the information to be brought forth, just as Tio said. And I'm very thankful to the aldermen for bringing things to light that other people may not know. And I think this should be a continuous conversation to educate people and let people know what the history behind being a sanctuary city is predicated upon.
Well, you know what? The last word, Lisa Buffundo, belongs to you, Alder. Carlos Ramirez Rosa, I'm so excited that you were here, and I hope that I hope you'll know that you have a home here. I want you to come over and over and over and over again, because you are an educator. And I invite you to Rainbow Push, because I think it's important for you to come on a Saturday morning and take a few minutes and educate us on sanctuary cities. And because we all need each other, and we are, certainly I'm your elder. I'm very proud of you and the work that you're doing. So let me just say that. So the closing thought belongs to you.
Thank you so much, Santita.
As does our future. It's in your hands. You got to help me, because they're taking away my Social Security, young man. When I get it, I'm not going to be able to get it. So I need you to do something.
Yeah. Well, I think that your father, taught us the way through the Rainbow Coalition, and that is that we need solidarity across racial lines. We need solidarity across communities, because that's the only way we have ever defeated white supremacy and white nationalism. And we should not for 1 second lose sight that this Trump presidency is a white nationalist presidency. They have made that very clear. They are coming after diversity, equity, and inclusion. They are coming after diversity. They are saying they do not want Black people in positions of power. They have made that very clear. They do not want brown people in positions of power. So they're coming after Jews. They're coming after Black people. They're coming after Latinos. They're coming after migrants. And so it's incredibly important for us to stand in solidarity and to continue the legacy of your father with the Rainbow Coalition. That started right here in the city of Chicago. And so we should all be proud of the work the Chicagoans have done over many years to stand in solidarity with one another. And we have to continue in that trajectory if we're going to have any chance of surviving the next 4 years.
Amen to that. And Kendall, I hope you will come back, because we are at Push every Saturday morning, and we are having a good time. And maybe it's because times are getting tough, but the audiences are getting fuller and fuller and fuller every single week, and we want you there. And I tell you, it was, Dr. King was taken from us during the Poor People's Campaign that he was building with Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta and Rabbi Heschel. And it was just across all racial lines. Bayard Rustin, the great organizer. All of these false boundaries we've not had. When I met Bayard Rustin when I was a little girl, my parents, it would not have been appropriate, because you don't talk about people and their private business. But, even as I got older, he was not this gay organizer. He was a great organizer. And he lived the way he lived. Okay. I mean, it was of no greater consequence to me than my parents being together. I mean, it is what it is, everybody. Let us just go across these lines because we are all on the same earth at the same time, breathing the same air, and we need each other. We need each other. So let us come together. The only way that we're going to make it is together. And we are all seeking sanctuary. That is why we are all here. So don't look at anyone and tell them to go back anywhere, because nobody's trying to go back anywhere. Come on. America gave you everybody and everything. Think about it. Think about Michael Jackson and the Jackson 5 in Motown. You know, think of Jose Feliciano. Think of Nat King Cole. I mean, just think of the richness of our culture. Think about that. Think of George Carlin and Richard Pryor and Lenny Bruce and Dick Gregory. Come on. And out of all of the things that we are and are not, we've produced a lot of greatness, and we can do much, much more. So let's do this. Let's do this. Let's do this together. Alder Carlos Ramirez Rosa, I want you to come back. I'm going to reach out to you because I want you to come to PUSH to talk about sanctuary cities. We've got to move this forward because we should not have a mayor be penalized for seeking to be humane, for talking people up and not talking down to them, for looking for a way to treat everybody well. So in these under-resourced communities, you have a responsibility to get registered to vote and to get active in the system because it belongs to you. So let's get to it, everybody. Oh, and Kendall Martin Cooper, how can you be contacted? Because Kendall Martin Cooper wants to get in touch with you.
I can be emailed at carlos@carlosrosa.org. And that's probably the best way to reach me.
Okay, could you say that one more time?
That's carlos@carlosrosa, CARLOSROSA.org.
Amen. Everybody, AM 950 Radio, let's talk about the revolt of the rich. Did you hear that Elon Musk and Secretary of State confirmed by the Senate? Yeah, you don't have to like his politics, but he has been confirmed. Well, they got into a big fight, according to press reports, because he said, wait a minute, I'm the secretary here. I'm the secretary. Let's talk about this. Because the rich have been revolting, and we need to look at the 1970s. But first, we're going to look at Bloody Sunday and why this weekend, the 60th anniversary of the Selma to Montgomery March, is so important. So important. We'll be talking about that with Dr. David Gibbs in just a minute over on the next hour of the Santita Jackson Show. And thank you for pronouncing my name correctly, Carlos Ramirez Rosa. Alder, thank you for that. Oh, say it one more time.
Only for you, Santita Jackson.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. Hello, you guys. That's cool. My name. It's my name. And my mother, she's going to ask you to record it. She said, that's what I named my child. Yes. All right, everybody. AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Back in just a moment.